The first thing everyone noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the dangerous kind that only exists inside prison walls, where noise means survival and quiet means someone is about to be tested. The yard was already alive with movement. Chains clinked softly as men walked in loose circles. Laughter broke out near the benches. A few guards leaned against the fence, watching without really watching. That's when the new inmate stepped out. He didn't look like trouble. No swagger. No loud mouth. No desperate eyes scanning for allies. Just a simple walk, shoulders relaxed, hands loose at his sides, as if he had nowhere else he needed to be. His clothes were plain, his face unreadable. The kind of man most people wouldn't notice twice. Unfortunately, in this place, that was a mistake. A shadow crossed his path, tall, heavy, confident. A man everyone knew. The kind of inmate who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention, because fear did it for him. Conversations nearby slowed, a few heads turned, someone muttered, "Not him," under their breath. The bully smiled. It wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile meant to be seen. Hurd remembered. He circled the quiet man slowly, eyes dragging over him like an inspection, pausing just long enough to draw a crowd. "Well, look at this," he said loudly. Fresh meat already lost. A few inmates chuckled, others stayed silent, eyes fixed on the ground. No one stepped in, no one ever did. The bully leaned closer, invading space that didn't belong to him. "You got lost on the way here," he added. "This yard ain't for tourists." The quiet man stopped walking. Slowly, deliberately, he turned to face him. He didn't speak. That only made it worse. The bully laughed louder, throwing an arm out as if presenting a joke to the entire yard. "You hear that?" he said. Not even brave enough to talk. More laughter followed. A guard glanced over, then looked away. The insult came next, sharp, public, meant to cut deep. Words chosen not just to humiliate, but to mark territory. To send a message to everyone watching. This man was weak, and weakness didn't last long here. Still, the quiet man didn't react. No anger, no excuses, no apology. He just stood there, calm, eyes steady, breathing slow as if the noise around him didn't exist. That's when something shifted. Not loudly. Not obviously. But enough that a few inmates stopped smiling. Enough that someone near the fence straightened up. Enough that the bully's laughter faltered for half a second, before he forced it back. Because there was something unsettling about that calm. In a place built on fear, silence like that wasn't normal. And as the bully prepared to push things further, certain he had control, certain the crowd was on his side, none of them knew they were standing seconds away from a moment that would freeze the entire prison. Nothing had happened yet, but everything was about to change. The prison yard wasn't just concrete and fences, it was a living hierarchy. Every step an inmate took was measured against invisible rules. Everyone understood, but no one explained. Strength wasn't about muscles alone. It was about reputation, about who controlled space without asking, about who others avoided eye contact with. Survival depended on reading the room faster than anyone else. This facility had seen its share of violence, and that history hung in the air like dust that never settled. Guards maintained order on paper, but the real structure existed beneath their boots. In here, power moved quietly from one man to another, enforced not by rules but by fear. The strongest didn't shout, they waited. Groups formed naturally by race, by history, by alliances built over time. New inmates learned quickly that standing alone made you visible. Visibility made you vulnerable. That's why most people tried to blend in during their first days, copying the behavior of those who had already figured out how to last. But blending in wasn't always enough. The yard itself was divided without lines. The benches near the wall belonged to one group. The open weights belonged to another. Even the shade during afternoon hours was claimed territory. Crossing those invisible borders without permission invited consequences no one wanted to face. The guards knew this. They pretended not to. To them, as long as blood wasn't spilled, the system was working. That's what made this place dangerous. The silence between incidents. The way tension could stretch for days before snapping without warning. Men learned to sense it the way sailors sense storms. A look held too long, a laugh that didn't belong, a step taken where it shouldn't be. Reputation traveled faster than fists. Some inmates had earned theirs through years inside, others through one unforgettable moment. Stories passed from cell to cell, exaggerated with each retelling. Names became warnings. Even guards spoke them differently, with a mix of caution and familiarity. And then there were the ones no one could read. Those men unsettled everyone. Because in a place where fear was currency, unpredictability was power. The quiet man had entered this system without announcement. No entourage. No alliances declared. He didn't rush to attach himself to a group, nor did he challenge anyone's space. He simply observed, watched who spoke first, who laughed loudest, who everyone else avoided. That alone raised eyebrows. Most newcomers were desperate to prove something: toughness, loyalty, submission. But this man carried himself as if none of that applied to him, as if he wasn't playing the same game. That kind of calm stood out more than aggression. Inmates noticed the way he walked, unhurried, balanced, aware. The way he stopped at the edge of conversations without intruding. The way his eyes moved, scanning without staring. These were small details, but in prison, small details meant everything. Some assumed he wouldn't last. Others weren't so sure. The bully certainly wasn't. To him, the yard was a stage. Control depended on being seen, on reminding everyone where they stood. Letting a quiet outsider move freely without being tested sent the wrong message. It suggested weakness. And weakness, if left unchecked, spread. So the decision had already been made. The humiliation wasn't personal, it was policy. By targeting the quiet man publicly, the bully reinforced the hierarchy. It was a demonstration meant for everyone watching. This is what happens when you don't know your place. The yard responded the way it always did. Some men leaned in, hungry for distraction. Others turned away, not wanting to be associated with what was coming. A few guards shifted their weight but didn't intervene. This was normal. Or at least, it was supposed to be. Because beneath the surface, something felt off. A tension that didn't belong to the usual script. The quiet man hadn't reacted the way experience said he should. No fear, no anger, no plea, just composure. That composure began to ripple outward, subtle but undeniable. Conversations faltered. Smiles faded. The air thickened with curiosity. In a place where every reaction was expected, this one wasn't. And for the first time since the yard had opened that morning, the hierarchy wavered, just slightly, as if the prison itself sensed that the rules everyone lived by were about to be tested. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next story, because the most powerful moments are often the quietest ones. Before we continue, tell us this. At this moment, what would you expect the quiet man to do next? The bully didn't earn his reputation overnight. It had been built piece by piece, moment by moment, through carefully chosen targets and public displays of control. He wasn't reckless. He didn't swing without reason. Every move he made served a purpose, to remind the yard who decided the rules. He stood taller than most, shoulders wide. Posture relaxed in a way that suggested nothing here could threaten him. His face carried the confidence of someone who had never been challenged in this place and fully expected that streak to continue. Scars marked his knuckles, not from random fights, but from moments people still whispered about. Everyone knew his name. Everyone knew what happened if you crossed him. New inmates were his favorite, not because they were weak, but because they were unknown, untested. A blank slate the yard needed filled in quickly. He believed uncertainty was dangerous. Better to crush it early than let it grow into something unpredictable. That's why he had chosen the quiet man. From the moment the newcomer stepped into the yard, the bully had been watching. Not openly, that would have given away interest, but from the corner of his eye, noting the lack of nerves, the absence of panic. That alone felt like an insult. Most new arrivals kept their heads down. He didn't stare either. He simply existed as if the yard had nothing to do with him. That couldn't be allowed. The bully moved in when the timing was perfect. Enough people around to witness it. Enough guards distracted to avoid interruption. He made sure his voice carried, his tone dripping with mockery designed to draw attention. "Hey," he called out, loud enough to cut through the yard noise. "You deaf or just stupid?" The quiet man stopped. Heads turned. The bully smiled wider. He stepped closer, invading space deliberately, forcing the kind of proximity meant to trigger fear. "I'm talking to you," he said. "Didn't they teach you how this place works?" No answer. That silence irritated him more than shouting ever could. He laughed and shook his head, turning slightly so others could see his expression. "Figures," he said. "Another guy who thinks staying quiet makes him invisible." A few inmates chuckled, more out of habit than amusement. They'd seen this routine before. It always ended the same way. The bully circled him again, slower this time, dragging the moment out. "You don't belong here," he said. "You look like you wandered in by accident." He gestured toward the benches. "See all these guys?" He continued. "They earned their spot, you." He scoffed. "You haven't earned anything." The words were sharp, chosen to sting. chosen to provoke a reaction, anger, fear, desperation. Anything that would confirm the quiet man's weakness. Still nothing. That's when the insults escalated. The bully leaned in close enough for his breath to be felt. "Let me guess," he said quietly, though everyone nearby could hear. "You think you're special? You think you're better than the rest of us?" He straightened up and raised his voice again. "Newsflash, nobody here cares." Laughter rippled through the crowd, louder now. The bully fed off it, shoulders loosening, confidence growing. He pointed at the quiet man's clothes, his posture, the way he stood without flinching. "Look at him," he said, standing there like he owns the place. The remark landed harder than intended. For a split second, the yard went quiet. The bully noticed it too, and his expression hardened. He didn't like losing momentum. He took a step closer, poking a finger into the quiet man's chest, not hard, just enough to assert dominance. "You hear me?" he snapped. "This is my yard." That was the moment everyone expected a reaction. A shove, a curse. Instead, the quiet man simply looked at him. Not with defiance, not with fear, just a steady, unreadable gaze. It unsettled the bully more than he cared to admit. He laughed again, louder than before, forcing confidence back into his voice. "That's it," he said.
"That's all you've got."
He turned to the crowd, spreading his arms. "Guess we found the quietest guy in prison." More laughter followed, but it wasn't as enthusiastic this time. Some inmates shifted uncomfortably. Others watched the quiet man more closely now, trying to understand why he wasn't reacting. The bully felt it, that subtle change in energy, and it irritated him. He had meant to end this quickly. Instead, he found himself standing in front of a man who refused to play his role. And without realizing it, the bully took one step too far, pushing a moment meant to humiliate into something far more dangerous. Because the quiet man still hadn't moved. And that kind of control, in a place like this, was never accidental. The quiet man did something unexpected. Nothing. He didn't step back when the finger pressed into his chest. He didn't tense his shoulders. He didn't clench his fists. He simply adjusted his footing, barely noticeable, shifting his weight evenly, as if settling into a more comfortable stance. It was the kind of movement most people wouldn't catch. But a few inmates did. The ones who paid attention to details. The ones who had survived by noticing what others missed. His breathing stayed slow, controlled. Each inhale measured, each exhale steady. The noise of the yard seemed to pass around him rather than through him, like water flowing around stone. The bully kept talking, filling the silence with noise, but something had changed. The quiet man's eyes never left his face. They weren't cold, they weren't angry. They were calm in a way that didn't ask for permission. It was unsettling. Most men, when cornered like this, gave something away. Fear flickering in the eyes, jaw tightening, hands betraying nerves. But this man offered nothing. No tells, no cracks. Just presence. He didn't need words. The bully laughed again, but this time the sound didn't carry as far. It echoed strangely, thinner than before. He took another half-step closer, trying to reassert control, but now it felt forced. Like he was chasing something that had already slipped from his grasp. "Say something," he snapped. "What, you mute?" Still nothing. The quiet man's gaze didn't harden. It didn't soften either. It simply stayed, patient, observant, as if he were waiting not for permission, but for the right moment. That patience made people uneasy. A few inmates who had been leaning against the fence straightened up. Someone stopped laughing mid-breath. Even the guards, without fully understanding why, found themselves watching more closely now. Because silence like this didn't belong to weakness. It belonged to restraint. The quiet man tilted his head slightly, not in submission, not in challenge, but as if considering something. As if measuring the situation, weighing outcomes no one else had thought about. That small movement spoke louder than words ever could. The bully noticed it too. For the first time, doubt flickered across his face. Just for a heartbeat. But in this place a heartbeat was enough. He masked it quickly, puffing his chest, raising his voice again. "What's the matter?" he barked. "Scared." The quiet man finally blinked once, slowly, and in that moment it felt as though the yard itself leaned in. He didn't answer the question. He didn't even acknowledge it. Instead, he shifted his eyes briefly, scanning the space around them. Not the crowd, not the guards. Exit. Distances, angles. Then his gaze returned to the bully, steady as ever. That was when something clicked for a few of the older inmates. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't fear. This was awareness. The quiet man wasn't reacting because he didn't need to. He wasn't trapped in the moment the way everyone else was. He was above it, observing, calculating, choosing stillness over impulse. In a place where men survived by reacting first, that kind of control was rare, dangerously rare. The bully felt it slipping now. The energy he fed on wasn't coming back the same way. The crowd wasn't with him anymore, not fully. They were watching the quiet man instead, trying to understand what they were seeing. So the bully pushed harder. He stepped closer again, chest nearly touching, trying to dominate through proximity. "I'm talking to you," he said through clenched teeth. "You think you're better than me?" The quiet man didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He didn't answer. He simply stood there, calm and unmoving, like a wall that didn't care how hard you leaned against it. That calm began to press back, not physically, but psychologically. It exposed the bully's noise for what it was: desperation dressed up as confidence. The yard felt different now. Heavier, quieter. People sensed it without understanding it. Because somewhere deep down, every man in that prison recognized the truth: real power didn't announce itself. It waited. And as the bully stood there, still talking, still posturing, still trying to reclaim control, the quiet man remained exactly where he was. Silent, composed, unshaken. As if he already knew how this was going to end. The shift didn't happen all at once. It crept through the yard slowly, like a change in weather no one could explain but everyone could feel. Conversations that had been running in the background began to fade. Laughter died mid-sentence. Even the usual sounds, shoes scraping concrete, weights clanking, distant shouting, seemed to dull, as if the prison itself was holding its breath. Eyes moved away from the bully. They settled on the quiet man. A few inmates exchanged looks, subtle but meaningful, the kind that asked questions without words. "Do you feel that? Something's wrong. This isn't how this usually goes." The bully kept talking, but his voice no longer controlled the space the way it had moments earlier. Each sentence landed softer than the last, swallowed by an attention he no longer owned. He noticed it too. His jaw tightened. His movements became sharper, less fluid. That confidence he wore so comfortably was starting to slip. One of the older inmates near the fence shifted his stance, crossing his arms. He'd seen hundreds of confrontations in this yard. He knew how fear looked. He knew how arrogance looked. And he knew with growing certainty that this quiet man wasn't either. A guard near the gate straightened, eyes narrowing slightly. He didn't know why he was watching so closely now. He just knew he should be. The crowd wasn't rooting for the bully anymore. They were waiting. The bully sensed it and tried to pull the attention back to himself, raising his voice again, adding more insults, sharper ones. But they felt rehearsed now, hollow, like lines spoken too late in a play everyone had already stopped believing in. The quiet man still hadn't moved. That stillness was starting to feel loud. A ripple passed through the group as someone took a step back, not from the bully, but from the space around the quiet man. Others followed instinctively, creating a small gap no one consciously decided to make. Distance, respectful or fearful, it was hard to tell. The bully noticed the space forming and his irritation turned to anger. He filled the gap quickly, stepping forward again, trying to reassert control by sheer proximity. But instead of feeling dominant, he looked exposed, like a man shouting into an empty room. For the first time, his voice wavered. Not enough for most to notice, enough for the quiet man to hear. The quiet man's posture hadn't changed, but his presence seemed larger now. Not because he was doing anything, but because everyone else was reacting to him without him asking. Whispers started, low, careful, passing from mouth to ear. "Who is that guy?" "He's not scared. That's not normal." Someone else shook his head slowly. "That's not a new fish." The bully heard fragments of it, and panic flickered behind his eyes. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out wrong. Forced, too sharp. He glanced around, searching for the familiar feedback, the nods, the smiles, the fear. He didn't find it. What he found instead were faces watching him, measuring him, reassessing. The power dynamic had shifted, and everyone knew it except him. Time stretched. Seconds felt longer than they should have. The kind of pause where anything could happen, and everyone knew it. A wrong move here wouldn't just be a fight, it would be a statement. The guards were alert now, not intervening but ready, muscles tense. Hands closer to their belts. They felt it too, that wrongness in the air, that sense that something unscripted was unfolding. The quiet man finally moved, just a fraction. He adjusted his shoulders, rolled his neck once, slow and deliberate, like someone preparing for something he had already accepted. The movement was calm, controlled, not aggressive, not defensive. Prepared. That tiny motion sent another wave through the yard. The bully froze for half a second, then covered it with another insult, but his voice cracked at the end. He cleared his throat, jaw clenched, eyes darting briefly toward the guards, then back to the quiet man. He was no longer in control. He was reacting. And in prison, reacting meant you were already behind. The yard felt like it was leaning forward now, every man aware that whatever came next would be remembered. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a moment that would become a story, retold, reshaped, whispered long after the day ended. The quiet man remained exactly where he was, centered, composed, unrushed, as if he knew the next move wouldn't need to come from him at all. Before we go on, at this point, do you think the bully realizes he's already lost? Or is he about to make his biggest mistake? The sound that cut through the yard wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. A single sharp command echoed from the gate, controlled, authoritative, impossible to ignore. Every head turned at once. Conversations died instantly. Even the bully stopped mid-sentence, his mouth still half open as the voice carried across the concrete. Nof. The word landed heavy. A senior officer was walking in, posture rigid, expression unreadable. He wasn't rushing, but he wasn't casual either. 2 guards followed a step behind him, eyes scanning the scene with a seriousness that hadn't been there before. The yard froze. The bully straightened instinctively, forcing a grin that didn't quite form. He took half a step back, suddenly aware of how exposed he looked standing so close. This wasn't how these situations usually ended. Authority didn't step in unless something had already gone wrong. The officer's gaze moved past the bully. It locked onto the quiet man. And then something unexpected happened. The officer stopped. Not briefly, not casually. He stopped the way someone does when they recognize a problem they hadn't anticipated. His posture shifted. His expression changed, not to fear, but to something far more dangerous in a place like this. Recognition. The yard felt it before anyone understood it. The officer took a breath and spoke again, his tone noticeably different now. Lower, respectful. "Sir, is everything all right here?" The word sir landed like a dropped weight. The bully's head snapped toward him. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. The quiet man finally responded, not with words, but with a slight nod. Calm, controlled, as if this interruption had been expected all along. The officer stepped closer, eyes never leaving him. "I wasn't informed you'd be joining us today," he said carefully. The bully's face drained of color. The officer hesitated for just a fraction of a second, then said the name, Stephen Seagal. The yard didn't erupt. It went silent. Not a single sound followed. No whispers, no laughter, no movement, the kind of silence that erased everything else. The bully stared, blinking rapidly, trying to process what he'd just heard. His mouth opened, then closed again. The name didn't fit the picture he had built in his head. It didn't fit the narrative he'd been so confident in moments earlier. Stephen Seagal, the quiet man. The realization hit him in stages, denial first, then disbelief, then something colder. His chest tightened. His confidence collapsed inward like a structure built on sand. He took a step back without meaning to. Stephen remained still, his expression unchanged. No satisfaction, no smugness. Just the same calm presence he'd carried since the beginning. The officer turned slowly toward the bully, his eyes hard now. "Step away," he ordered. This time, the bully didn't hesitate. He moved back quickly, hands raised slightly, eyes darting around as if searching for an exit that no longer existed. The yard watched him shrink in real time, his reputation unraveling with every step he took away from Stephen. The officer faced Stephen again. "I apologize for the disturbance," he said. Stephen finally spoke.
His voice was quiet.
"Even, calm, there's no need," he said. "I was just observing." The simplicity of the words carried more weight than any threat could have. The officer nodded, understanding something unspoken. Around them, inmates stood frozen, trying to reconcile what they'd witnessed. The man they had watched being insulted moments earlier hadn't needed to defend himself. He hadn't needed to prove anything. The truth had done the work for him. The bully stood off to the side now, eyes fixed on the ground, breathing shallow. The yard no longer belonged to him. It never really had. The officer addressed the guards, giving short, precise instructions. They moved immediately, surrounding the bully without force, without spectacle. Just inevitability. As he was led away, no one laughed. No one cheered. They simply watched. Stephen remained where he was, hands relaxed, posture unchanged. The storm had passed without him ever stepping into it. The yard slowly began to breathe again. But nothing felt the same, because every man there now understood something fundamental. Power didn't need to announce itself. It didn't need volume. It didn't need fear. Sometimes it arrived quietly, and when it did, the entire prison froze. Stephen didn't watch the bully leave. He didn't need to. His attention had already shifted back to the yard, to the men who were still standing there, processing what they'd just witnessed. Faces that moments earlier had been hungry for humiliation now looked uncertain, reflective, even embarrassed. The officer lingered nearby, clearly waiting for instructions. Stephen turned to him calmly, his voice steady and low. "This place runs on pressure," he said. "Pressure creates reactions. Reactions create mistakes." The officer nodded, listening closely. Stephen continued, not lecturing, not commanding, just stating facts. "Most problems here don't start with violence. They start with assumptions." He glanced briefly toward the space where the bully had been standing. That man thought control came from fear. Fear only works until it doesn't. The words weren't meant as punishment. They were meant as truth. The officer acknowledged it with a quiet yes and stepped away, leaving Stephen alone again, just another man in the yard, at least on the surface. But nothing about the yard felt ordinary anymore. Inmates slowly returned to their routines, though their movements were different now. Slower, more deliberate. Eyes followed Stephen with a new kind of awareness, not admiration, not fear, but understanding. They had just seen something rare. No fists thrown, no voices raised, no dominance forced. Yet the outcome had been absolute. An older inmate near the benches shook his head quietly. "That's real strength," he muttered to no one in particular. Another man nodded once, saying nothing. Stephen took a few steps forward, then stopped, sensing the shift around him. He didn't seek attention, but he didn't avoid it either. When a younger inmate met his eyes, Stephen offered a simple nod, neutral, respectful. That small gesture carried more weight than the bully's loudest insults ever had. Word spread fast, not the exaggerated kind, not rumors. Just the truth passed plainly. The quiet man hadn't needed to fight. He hadn't needed to threaten. He had simply stood his ground and let character do the rest. And that changed things. The yard didn't suddenly become peaceful. This was still prison. But something fundamental had adjusted. The hierarchy had been reminded that power wasn't always where people thought it was. Some men reflected on their own behavior. Others simply took note and moved on. But no one forgot the lesson. Stephen eventually made his way toward the far end of the yard, choosing a spot where the noise thinned. He stood there for a moment, eyes scanning the open space, the fences, the sky beyond them. He hadn't come here to prove anything. He had come to observe. And observation, when paired with restraint, had done more than force ever could. Behind him, conversations slowly resumed, different conversations. Quieter ones. Thoughtful ones. Men discussing respect. Timing, knowing when to speak and when not to. The bully's absence was noticeable. But more noticeable was what he had taken with him. The illusion that loudness equaled strength. Stephen exhaled slowly, grounding himself back into the present. The moment had passed, the lesson had landed. That was enough. Because real justice didn't always need punishment. Sometimes it needed perspective. And real power didn't need to dominate. It needed to endure. As the yard settled back into its rhythm, one thing was clear to everyone who had witnessed it. They would think twice before mistaking silence for weakness again. Before we wrap up, which moment stood out to you? The most: the bully's confidence at the start, or the silence that ended everything?